Welcome to Between the Reads, where we shine a spotlight on some of the most talented Black authors in the industry to discuss their works of fiction and the inspirations behind them. Each episode will dive into the rich and diverse world of literature, exploring everything from historical fiction to romance and speculative fiction to YA and beyond. Tune in as we celebrate the voices of Black authors and the power of storytelling. Are you ready, Boos and Bros? Then sit back, relax, and let's get to it. Leslye Penelope is the award-winning author of the Earthsinger Chronicles. The first book in the series, Song of Blood and Stone, was chosen as one of Time magazine's 100 best fantasy books of all time. Equally left and right-brained, she studied filmmaking and computer science at Howard University and sometimes dreams in HTML. She hosts the My Imaginary Friends podcast and lives in Maryland with her husband and furry dependents. And you can visit her online at lpenelope.com. Leslye, welcome back to Between the Reads.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here, Audra. It's so good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you again, too. You know I can't ever not side-eye Howard.
I know. Hampton folks, I mean, we just can't deal with that.
we just, my brother and my brother-in-law both went to Howard, so when we get together, it's always like Hampton versus Howard thing.
Right. It never ends, but it's all love.
It's all love. It's all love. It's all love. But even in the book, I was like,
Hey, if it had taken place in Hampton, maybe there's a book in me about Hampton coming. We'll see.
Honestly, Hampton just does not. Hampton, my school has some good history, but Hampton, the town itself,
yeah,
there's just nothing there. Other than NASA and the Hidden Figures.
Oh, right, yeah.
We have that because there's a NASA base there. But other than that, there's not much in Hampton, Virginia to really write a story about. Be a very short book.
You might be able to dig up something. There's usually history everywhere of some kind.
True. Very true. Very true. So tell us what the Monsters We Defy is all about.
So this is my 1925 fantasy heist that takes place in Washington, D.C. That was the core idea. And so it's about a group of people who have been given/cursed powers by these spirits called enigmas. Mm-hmm. And most of them are trying to get rid of these. So one of the spirits makes a deal with my main character, Clara, to steal a magical ring. And if she steals this ring, she will be freed of her obligations. Mm-hmm. And so it's part heist story, part fantasy, working in ideas from like African-American folk magic and hoodoo, conjure type of stuff into an adventure story with a romance in there.
Yeah. And what a story it is. And before we kind of dig into the story, I want to talk about the real Clara Johnson, who she is, and how she inspired this novel.
Right. So, yeah, I was researching, trying to find a story. I knew I wanted to do a heist in the Harlem Renaissance, and I quickly figured out I wanted to do it in D.C. because, my family's from D.C. I went to Howard. I've lived in Maryland most of my life. Mm-hmm. So I was just really searching for anything, and I came across a story in the Washington Post about the 1919 riots in D.C., which I didn't even know there were riots in 1919. I didn't realize Red Summer had hit D.C. like that. Mm-hmm. And so in this story, this article, there's a story of the real Clara Johnson. She called herself Carrie. She was 17 years old during the 1919 riots when she was at home and the police stormed into her house, into her bedroom where she was hiding with her father. Both of them were armed. So when the police started shooting, they shot back. She and her father were both wounded, but she shot a white police detective. And she was dragged out of there. She managed to stay alive through the process of getting to jail and eventually charged with manslaughter and convicted. Mm-hmm. Now, she wasn't allowed to plead self-defense at her trial. And it was very obviously a case of self-defense. So when she came up for her appeal, and the next judge on the case allowed her to plead self-defense, the DA realized they're not going to get another conviction. So they essentially let her go. And only after she had spent a year and a half in jail. And so, but when she was first arrested, the Black community did rally around her. There were fundraisers and just the community, not just in DC, but all over, like Black newspapers all around were talking about this 17-year-old girl. Mm-hmm. And so she became sort of a minor celebrity. Mm-hmm. And then after she's released, she kind of fades into history. I did try to find out what happened to her, but it's not really clear. And so this girl, obviously it reminded me of Breonna Taylor And, there's other Black women who've been killed by the police in their own homes. And this is just a situation where it turned out differently. And she was able to fight back. The whole story of the DC riots were Black people fighting back. There were a lot of veterans from World War I who were armed, and they were protecting their communities in DC. So, it was still very horrible, obviously, but the pockets of community where the Black people were like, no, we're not doing this. We have our guns and we're fighting back against the rioters. And she was just the exemplification of this. And I just imagined what kind of person must she have been, and what was her life like after that. And so taking this experience, the book is set 6 years after the events, and fictionalizing Carrie, using her given name Clara, and thinking, what had this experience done to her? And then sort of, imagining another kind of backstory, and just the idea that was magic involved. Like, the only reason that this girl stayed alive and then was released after killing this white man in 1919, I was like, magic,
Right.
Otherwise, it's amazing that it happened for real, but adding that layer onto it just kind of fascinated me and caught my attention. And so she became the main character, and I sort of built the story around her and imagining what her story could have been.
And I want to just side note here off of my questions. So you're writing this during the pandemic.
Yes.
Which it was the year, actually, the 3rd anniversary of Breonna Taylor's death was just a few days ago. So when you're writing this and this whole thing happens with Breonna, how does that resonate with you? What does that do to you?
I actually started writing after. So I was writing in 2020, but in the summer, I believe, the idea was coming to me. I was doing research about it, and I can't remember the date. I know I found out about Clara Johnson sometime shortly after Breonna Taylor was killed. Okay. And so that was kind of the spark that really started bringing everything together, because I was looking at the dates, and, it was almost exactly 100 years before, it was just, this keeps happening, and this is still happening. And then further in the research, like looking into the beginnings of the NAACP and how it started, and just these struggles that have been going on for such a long time, and the marches, and they were trying to get anti-lynching legislation passed in Congress, which never passed 100 years ago, and all of the things that were just so echoes of what we're dealing with today. And so as far as we've come, there's still these things that show us how far have we come, how far do we still have to go, Right.
And the other thing in the story, the Pollyannas had raised all this money for her to get out of jail, and then they never actually gave it to her family. Was that true, or is that something that that was just for the story?
That is 100% true. The Pollyannas were a social club in DC. They were sort of a high class social club.
Highfalutin Negroes.
Highfalutin, right? And they held a fashion show for her. It was in the newspapers, how much they raised. Duke Ellington, who was a musician, but he was still a painter at the time, he painted signs for this fashion show for Carrie Johnson. That was how it was advertised. So they raise all this money, and she gets out of jail. They don't ever give it to her. When she gets out, she sues them. She brings a lawsuit against the Pollyannas to get her money. Now, unfortunately, I could not find whether she won or not, because the main Black newspaper went out of business in 1921, and no one else was reporting about it. And I just, if someone out there has like super research abilities into the legal system of DC, I would love to know, because I searched for days and couldn't figure it out. But yeah, she sued them, and she was like, please give me my money. And the newspaper articles of the time of the fashion show make it very clear that this was the purpose. But the Pollyannas later said that, the fashion show wasn't even for her,
Wow.
It was crazy. Sometimes truth is stranger than fiction.
Yeah, because, I'm thinking that can't be true, because I kept stopping while I'm reading this book and like going and searching out things, like the first Black bank and the hotel, and I'm reading and learning so much. But when I saw that part, I was like, no, she must have made that part up for this story.
I did as much reality, real history is in there as possible. There are, of course, things I made up, but the vast majority, everything that is true,
See, that's why I got them problems with them highfalutin Negroes now, because I totally felt for Clara and her lack of enamor for that society, because I had a really bad experience with a friend of mine who was in Jack and Jill, and I went to an event, and because my parents were working class. And when I went, her mother was like, "Oh, this is Shan's friend, and just she's not one of us, but let's just be nice to her anyway." Like,
right? Like my parents wouldn't let me join Jack and Jill at a certain point.
Good.
Because my mom was like, no. She had a similar experience of, that kind of snobbery, and she was like, nah. And I mean, growing up in Montgomery County, Maryland, which is mostly white, there's advantages to being an all-black group, but, I think that she didn't want to deal with the parents, and ultimately I totally understand why.
Yep. Every time Clara had something to say and was snarling, I was like, yup. I'm right there with you, Clara. I hear you, girl. I understand. So speaking of Clara, let's talk about her, the character now, and her issues with the new Negro.
Yeah, Clara. So the story meets her as she's a typist for Dr. Carter G. Woodson, and I got to pull in real history there. And so, but her father was a carpenter, and as far as I could tell, I got that from somewhere too. Like I found her father, the real person.
Okay.
And so she is working class and she's had this experience. She's also darker skinned. And so there's the class, which often goes hand in hand, not always, but with colorism in Black communities. And so she is not really here for any of that. She's not here. She has conflicts with the Pollyannas. It's exemplified by a fictionalized character in the book who represents that whole, idea, that lifestyle and that. And I think the new Negro, there was so much sort of polarization in the Black community. We've got, Booker T versus W.E.B. And in D.C. itself, because D.C. had such a high concentration of Black people, I think it had the largest number of Black people in a city. Before Harlem, they were in D.C. And then eventually, Harlem kind of took over. But at this point in time, it's still moving in that direction. So you have a lot of well-to-do Black people. You still have the people who were in Congress, during Reconstruction, when they elected Black Congress people. And so, yeah, it's just dealing with all of those difficulties that are intra-community difficulties is something that I wanted to deal with. And Clara sort of exemplifies that because she is of a certain class and she's not accepted by certain other people, but she's still very smart and she, reads voraciously and she has all of these ideas, but she also has deep insecurities about her background and things like that because of how she's treated, essentially.
Right. And first of all, I just love this book. I had mentioned to you in the last podcast that you and I did together that When Washington Was in Vogue was a book that I had read, and you said that you had read that as well.
Right.
And I love that because there was this whole, for lack of a better word, Harlem Renaissance, but it happened in D.C. So I love to see this whole thing taking place. But I really loved when Clara told Addie off because Addie worked my last damn nerve. Oh, I could not stand Addie. Addie and Dr. Harley. Oh,
yes.
It made me so mad. And when Clara was reading her about this, she was like, "Did you not understand that aspect of the book when you read it?" And Addie just sitting there
blinks.
I love that. I love that she got, her just desserts. And then also later on when they come in with the wedding invitations in hand. And they're like, well, we were just wondering.
Yes, getting their comeuppance was super satisfying after having these
although
villains.
I wouldn't have been as nice as Clara. I'd have been like, nah, you can just send it in the mail. Because
I'm trying to show Clara's growth. Like Clara, at the beginning she was going to fight him. And at the end, I'm trying to be like, okay, she has learned a little bit. She's still got it in her, but she's trying.
I would have showed the growth. I mean, you showed the growth by her not getting up and punching somebody in the eye.
Exactly.
But I would have just been like, nah, you don't want a lowly peasant like me from the low Negro class going and giving something to Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois. Do you know? We ain't going to do that. You can put it in the mail, sis. Put it in the mail.
Right.
You're better than me. I would have written out a whole different way, but I like that way too. That was good. It was good. She just kind of sat back and let them stew in their own embarrassment for a little while. Yeah, I like that.
No, I feel your way.
Yeah, well, you know me. It's just, that's the Jersey girl and be coming out like, no, we ain't about to do this right now. So I learned a lot about historical places in D.C. by reading this novel. Now, I know you know a lot about it because you went to Howard, so you know, at least you know about the city and stuff like that. But tell us about the research process, because in the book you have this bank that's still in existence today, that was started by a man who had no means and, you know, built his way up, and then the architect who built the building, and the famous hotel that's still there. It's apartment buildings today. So tell us about your research process for this, because you have so many interesting little tidbits thrown throughout the book.
Yeah, so like you said, I started writing this book during the pandemic in 2020, and so I couldn't go to libraries. I literally could not go anywhere. So a lot of it was online research and actually buying used books and just increasing my book collection. But I used, so there's different levels. You know, I would go down some rabbit hole and be like, okay, I need to, oh, this is something great. I want to put this in the book. The thing about the hotel, I found the historic registry, I think it's like the application for it to become a historic place, had been filed and was online. And I just came across it and had all of this detailed information about who built the hotel and how, in order to get it registered as a historic place. There were things like that where there was this whole packet of information on Carter G. Woodson, including people who knew him, like secretaries who worked for him and researchers who worked for him, giving their real opinions of him. That was as part of this packet from the National Park Service that I just came across. So a lot of it was just taking a lot of time and going down these rabbit holes of things that interested me. And when I would find something, I would pull on a thread and I'd be like, oh, that has to go in the book. Can I fit this in the book? Can I fit that in the book? Without making it feel overstuffed like a history book, but it's still a story. But if I can include, you know, these things that I may have heard about, but I didn't know too much about. And once I dug into them, I'm like, that's fascinating. Other people need to know this information. Like being able to include real figures like Carter Woodson and Langston Hughes. When I found out he lived in D.C. during this time, in 1925 is when he lived here, when he worked for Dr. Carter Woodson, right before he was, you know, found at the Wardman Park Hotel and became, the limelight got thrown on him. But that was real. So I read part of his autobiography. It was a lot of just searching, you know, trying to build up my understanding of what life was like and all the different aspects of Black life in this neighborhood. Because I knew I wanted to make U Street, that neighborhood, feel like the whole world. Because it seems like it was certain people's whole world. You could live as a Black person in this neighborhood and do everything there. Work, shop, live, you know, have your entertainment and nightlife. And I wanted to have that this microcosm of just Black life. And so everything, you know, the books I read, and I was on JSTOR.org, which is kind of an archive of academic papers. So history journals and like anthropological journals and just cultural journals and things like that, where I would find something and read an article about it and, you know, look in the biography, the bibliography of the article and find what books they were using. There were a couple of books I couldn't find and couldn't get at used bookstores, and it just drove me crazy. But everybody was referencing them, so I felt like I had, you know, a good amount of information. Right. But yeah, as far as I could take the online research, that is what I did.
Yeah, I would imagine you probably spent days just researching and not even writing, because you just go down so many rabbit holes.
Weeks, months, probably. Yes.
Wow.
I did several months of research before I ever outlined and started drafting the book. And then even as I was writing, I was still doing research the whole way through. So
yeah, that's great. I mean, that's just, like I said, I just learned so much. I was sending my husband links like, did you know this? Because, you know, he's from Maryland. He grew up in Upper Marlboro. And I'm like, did you know this? Did you know this? He's like, what? No, I didn't know that. I'm like, cats. And he's like, what are you reading? I was like, the novel, The Monsters We Defy. He's like, and this is in the book? I was like, it's in the book. It's in the book. So what was one thing that you learned about DC from this time period that just completely took you by surprise?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, like there were so many interesting things, and I guess it shouldn't take me by surprise. I think that I said it in August of 1925 because I discovered that the Ku Klux Klan had a march down Pennsylvania Avenue in August of 1925. And it really shouldn't be surprising, but it, you know, right in front of the White House, and, you know, these 6 years after these riots had taken place, and, you know, this is the height of the Klan post 1915 when Birth of a Nation, the film, came out, and they kind of revitalized themselves. And the real thing that's in the book is that during this Klan march, there was a wave of pickpockets came down from New York and picked the pockets of the Klan marchers.
I love it.
And I was like, that's going in the book. Gotta have it. Even though it's a tiny little part, you know?
Right.
Like, that is one of those things that's absolutely real.
Wow.
So just a little bit of comeuppance, a little bit of irony that was a little juicy that I thought was kind of cool.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of that, with a side note again, so is that how you formed Zelda's character, or did you where did she come from?
Zelda, so originally I was thinking of like the types of characters that I would have before I knew who they were. And originally I wanted to have a character who was passing for white, because that's, you know, passing is just such a part of the culture.
Right.
And just interesting questions that it brought up about relationships between color and colorism and blackness. And then I came across in the research these images of these children with albinism, these black children with albinism who were either sold or taken or hired by circuses. And this was fairly common. And there was this biography of these two brothers who that happened to. Like in one version of the story, their mother sold them, but their mother actually spent 20 years trying to get them back because they were actually stolen from her. She didn't know where they were going or where they were. So these experiences of Black people as circus freaks because they had albinism, that's where Zelda came from. And so instead of having someone passing for white, I have someone whose skin is essentially white, who might from a distance or even sometimes up close get mistaken for white, although Black people with albinism are obviously not white people.
Right, right.
And so, you know, that relationship to Blackness combined with what is it like growing up in the circus, and how does that make a person different? And then she quickly became my favorite character because she was just so grounded in herself and everything, and she was unflappable, and she had all of these skills. I got to make her a pickpocket, and she could do, you know, like aerobics and ninja things, and she learned martial arts from an Asian man in the circus, and, you know, card tricks. She could do whatever she needed to do.
Right. I think she was my favorite character. She was so magical. She, you know, did that coin trick and just had Clara spellbound with that.
Right.
You know, and then in those couple of fight scenes where she just appears, like just drops down literally from the ceiling. It's like, you know, and she's fighting people. And then, you know, the one Thaniel, he's like, I just wanted to meet the little lady that was able to take me out, you know?
Right? Yes.
Zelda was magical. I absolutely loved her. And I also love how, you know, when, you know, a character in the book thought she was white, she was like, I'm just as black as you are. You know, and she just let him know.
Right.
I love Zelda. I think she's probably my favorite character in the novel.
And she's the only one of the crew that actually doesn't have any magic, you know, but she's still magical because of herself. And I just thought that was really powerful too.
Yep. Well, she does have magic, because how does she make that coin just appear and disappear? And then Clara found it in her pocket, and she was like, how did you do
researched sleight of hand coin tricks. Like, there is a little bit of like, okay, could she really do that? But I did actually spend a couple of days researching how do coin tricks happen? How do those like crazy card tricks, how do they do that?
Right.
So yeah, there's a little bit of, you know, artistic
did you
license.
find out how they put something in your pocket without you knowing it?
I found it in certain circumstances. The circumstance that I wrote isn't that circumstance that I read about, but like on some levels, yes. I took it a little too far. I took it a little further than was probably possible.
I don't know, because I feel like I've seen that where, you know, they're like, check your pocket, and it's in your pocket.
Happens. It does happen. And I can't remember now, but like it has to be, you know, they actually have at some point have been close by and slipped it in or whatever, you know, like there's very like normal ways that it happens, but it makes it really look like magic. And you have to be your fingers do have to be flexible. Like I had her like, you know, stretching her fingers because there's a lot of sleight of hand requires dexterity in your fingers to hold the coins and not like let them be shown and stuff like that.
Yeah. Zelda's my girl. She's magical. I love her.
Yes.
Love her. So what commentary does the Monsters We Defy make on freedom, both the personal freedom, your spiritual freedom, and even in the societal sense?
Yeah, I thought a lot about freedom for Black people, you know, post-slavery, and how the legacy of the past affects, you know, our freedom, our choices, our destiny. A lot of the theme of the book is destiny. And so I found that in all Black community that was thriving in the way that this U Street community seemed to be in my research, changed my perspective of the past in a way, because you kind of think about, oh, everyone was struggling, everyone is having a really hard time during this period, which so many people were. But there was a freedom in having our own communities be so close-knit by necessity.
Right.
And so then also the layer of the spirits, and when these characters make these deals with these spirits, they are taking away some of their own freedom because they're kind of locked into a charm and a trick. You know, a good thing and a bad thing that happens is always this balance. The idea of balancing your everything. Everything is a balancing act in life. You know, the good comes with the bad, and we have to find a way to manage that. Yeah. So it was all about community, individual choices and freedom, and then also the legacy of history and how that affects us. And those are kinds of things that I'm always interested in. And yeah, so that's kind of what I would say about freedom in this book.
And now, Black Broadway. This is something that I learned about, and I showed you the book that I bought as a result of, you know.
Ooh, I need that.
Yeah. So why was it important to include references to it, and who was the person that she thought she saw? Because you didn't name him, the famous vaudevillian.
So yes, I did not name him because it would have been an anachronism.
Okay.
And of course I forgot his name. He was a very big...
Was it Bert something? Because I had looked up, and Bert Williamson or something like that?
I think yes.
Okay.
And he'd actually passed away by this time. So in my mind, there's a point where she sees a very famous vaudevillian putting blackface on his face in the green room. And yeah, he was the one I had in mind, but he wasn't alive at this point. And I was trying to see, was there another huge, you know, well-known Black vaudevillian? But I wanted that in there. So yeah, I kind of fudged that because I didn't want to name him.
Okay.
Yeah.
But what made you include Black vaudeville in the story?
One of the things I wanted, because it was just interesting to me, was the idea of Black people in blackface. And so much of vaudeville, mostly earlier than this period, you know, so Aristotle, one of the characters, he's the oldest of the crew, and he had been through that. And that was a thing. Even recently, I was listening to, I don't know what I was. There was another singer who had to blacken her face because she was a little too light skinned, and they were like, oh, they might accidentally think that you are white, so you have to, you know, blacken your face before you get on stage. Oh, it was Kennedy Ryan's book Real. I was reading that. Okay. And she has a sort of a dual timeline with a Black singer from the 20s and 30s. Okay. But yeah, just the fascination that I felt with Black performers having to be in blackface and what that would even do to them. It's something that I wanted to include because it was a part of the history that confounded and interested me. And, you know, another thing about identity and the relationship to Blackness. You have sort of white skin, dark skin, who's too dark, who's not dark enough. All of these things. And I don't know if I had anything to say about it, but just this is what happened. This was what life was like, and I wanted to make sure people knew that was all part of the mix.
Right. Yeah. So now in the book, you've got mentions of Dr. Carter G. Woodson, who Clara works for. You have W.E. Du Bois. You have Langston Hughes.
Right.
You really tried to show the personality of these Black icons, not just their untouchableness. Talk to us about how you derived these aspects of their personalities for the book.
Yeah, so Langston Hughes, I get a lot of feedback on about so-called trifling Langston Hughes. I love
He's
Langston
my
Hughes'
favorite,
poetry.
but okay.
Yeah, no, I love Langston Hughes, and I think I read his autobiography, The Big C, and especially the sections when he was in D.C., and what popped out at me was this personality that I gleaned from the pages. I mean, he was talking about all of the duties that Dr. Woodson had him doing and sort of complaining about them and listing them out. And like, I worked at a laundry before, and working at the laundry was easier. And I was like, was working at the laundry easier than working at this like white collar job?
Right. Like, bro, what are you talking about?
Right? And then he quit to become a busboy, which I mean was the right choice for him, but it left me with an impression about him that is sort of informed the personality that he has in the book, which is like kind of fun loving, not super responsible, kind hearted, but like he's not the one that you want to rely on necessarily to get stuff done.
Right.
And similar with like Dr. Woodson, reading these sort of firsthand accounts of people who worked with him, which described him as a difficult person. You know, he was a little bit cold. He was hard to deal with. He was tough. He drove them really hard. And I thought about that. I'm like, okay, what is this like? And I softened him a little bit in the book because, you know, like thinking about real, like great people, great men and women of history. What did it take to build this from the ground up? I mean, to do all of the things that, you know, Langston Hughes did and Dr. Woodson did.
Right.
What kind of personality would that require? And so, yeah, I took it from the research as much as possible and then filtered it through my brain into a character that had just sort of a purpose in the novel, in addition to, you know, just showing us true history.
Yeah, because I love how Clara just kept referring to him as the jackass, you know. And it was
Dr. Harley.
Or Dr. Harley, yeah. She
Yeah.
just kept referring to him as the jackass. And then with Dr. Woodson, he was like this. He was there, but, you know, he was just this, more like this presence, you know.
Yes.
That was just, that kept you just knowing that the man was there, just kind of kept him, you know, kept people in line in the office.
Yeah.
Yeah. So share with us how the historical context of Washington, D.C. in 1925 really adds to the significance of the themes of community and race and power in this book.
Yeah, like DC, you know, reading about how the class system in DC kind of came about because so many, you know, after the Civil War, people flocked to DC and they had former slaves there, but they had also had a lot of freed people. And the government was integrated until Woodrow Wilson, you know, in the 19-teens came in and resegregated it. So for years, they were able to have good government jobs and create wealth. And then that's sort of taken away.
In one fell swoop, just gone.
Right. Yeah, it's gone. And so there's the entrenched classes, and then there's the new people coming. And we have the alley, you know, the alley communities, which I learned about, which I actually didn't know anything about, that behind all of these like famous DC row houses, you go into the alleys and there was a whole nother world. There were other houses back there, back to back with the main houses. And a lot of times the people in the main houses had no idea who was back there. Like they didn't have any, you know, relationship with those people, and they didn't have running water or electricity most of the time up until the 50s and 60s. And so learning about that in these, you have these wealthy Black communities, and then you have intense poverty literally behind them. And you know, all of that kind of went into it. So DC was a unique place. You often hear about Black life in Chicago and in New York, Harlem, and things like that, but you don't see a lot of books and films, you know, portraying the uniqueness of DC, and it was very unique. And the more I learned about it, the more I just wanted to show that, you know. So you have people who were former Congresspeople, like I said, they were judges, there were all kinds of, you know, doctors and lawyers and all of that too. And then you've got working people and, you know, people who were just sharecroppers, you know, a few years ago coming in the Great Migration, joining, and everything was here, and they had to kind of be together and muddle along together in their separate and unequal, you know, Black communities. And that was just something I wanted to explore and write about.
Yeah. Did you know, I was reading another book, Black Was the Ink by Michelle Coles. Did you know that Arlington National Cemetery was actually a Black community?
Oh, no, I didn't.
Yeah, it was like an entire Black community when the newly freed enslaved people, they had built like tents there and stuff like that. And then eventually it was built up because it was part of the land that was given to them.
Oh, like the Freedmen's Bureau land?
Yeah,
kinda?
like,
Okay.
yeah, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It was just a portion for them, but it was an entire Black community with like banks and everything.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did. When I read that, I was like, wait, because it was one of those things. It's a historical fiction book, so it was one of those things where I went in and, you know, started looking like, is this true? And then found out that it was.
Yeah, yeah.
And now
so
it's
many
a
Black
cemetery.
communities are destroyed by, like, cemeteries, highways, like,
Yeah.
you know, whatever they felt like building.
Stadiums, all that stuff. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So let's circle back to Clara and the other characters for a moment. How does her gift of communicating with spirits serve as this sort of metaphor for her struggles with debt and oppression?
Yeah, so Clara is born with a call. So she's born being able to communicate with spirits. And then she also has this spirit debt because of a deal she made with a spirit called the Empress. And she had, I played around with different ideas of how much power to give her. And, I hold back in the novel what her actual charm is because it's something she did not want to use. And to show her character, like, it's a very powerful gift that she was given for a specific purpose. And when she used it, she realized, I can't ever use this again because it's too much.
Right.
So, yeah, she is responsible for brokering deals with other people to indebt them. And that's her trick. She can't say no when someone needs her help. And she knows that she's saddling these people with things that they probably are too desperate to understand, or they're willfully not understanding the consequences of getting into debt with these spirits. And so that's another part of the freedom. She's trying to free herself from this debt. And so the other characters, she works out that anyone who helps her can get free from debt also. So her natural abilities to speak with spirits has been a burden because she couldn't control it for a long time. And the burden of having to, put other people in debt is just all weighs on her. I think that's why she's so prickly. She's gone through life having to create this thick shell in order to protect herself from various things, both mundane and spiritual. And it just created a character who I felt a lot for. I felt a lot of compassion for her, even as I liked her prickliness and, her ability to tell it like it is. But there's also a lot of pain there. And so that growth and that change of helping to heal her a little bit and solidify these relationships, this found family that she gets over the course of the book, I thought that was also important.
Yeah. So speaking of that, you have quite a diverse cast of characters in the novel. Share with us how they all played a role in the themes of, teamwork and trust and redemption.
Right. Yeah. So we have Israel, who is our musician, and he can hypnotize with, his charm is to be able to hypnotize people. And then Aristotle, the vaudevillian performer, who almost like a shapeshifter, he can change his appearance. Jessie Lee, who is memory, he can control memory. And of course, Zelda doesn't actually have any powers, but she has her own.
She does.
She has the magic powers. And they come together as sort of an unlikely team. The thing about writing a heist is a lot of times in a heist, these people are like professional criminals, or they've got these skills that have been used for nefarious purposes.
Right.
And Zelda, to a certain degree, Jessie Lee, but these people aren't really professional criminals. They're all here trying to do something good. When they discover that, releasing themselves from their debts is also going to help the community, that's an extra impetus for them to do this thing that's really hard that they don't think they can do, and steal this ring. So everyone has layers of motivation. And, Claire's very suspicious. She kind of gets pushed together with Israel because they have the same goal, and they know they can't do it alone. But she's also still suspicious that she's been double-crossed. The idea that these Pollyannas double-crossed her in the past, and she's been abandoned by her mother, and sort of her father kind of left. And, she's just out here not knowing exactly why these things have happened to her.
Right.
So, everyone is dealing with their own difficulties, and I try to, really quickly draw their backstories, and so the reader would understand in short order why they're here and what the thing is that they're trying to do, and feel for them. And so, when they come together, it's about community. It's about saving this community where people are thriving and where they can have hope for the future, and if they get rid of their debts, then they have a lot more hope for their own futures. They can find happiness and love and all of that. So it's just kind of a found family story that is also a heist.
Yeah. And side note, and I'm going to come back to Makeda's ring too, but I loved your reference that some people might not have caught. Jessie Lee was a Pullman porter.
Yes.
And I love that reference where he says, I've told you before my name is not George, because I have 2 books on Pullman porters, and they talked about how the white people called them all George. Like,
yes.
So I love that little reference in there for people that might pick this book up and read it. There's a reference there. So you want to go look that up. Yeah. And so tell us about this whole world that you built, because you have charms and tricks, you have the enigmas, the grays, you have the foot dust, and over there and the next place. Tell us how you came up with this whole world, how you built it.
So it originally the idea of enigmas was something I had been playing with in short stories. So if people sign up for my newsletter, I give them a free short story that includes some enigmas. And I was playing around with this idea that there were originally 22 enigmas, and they were based on the tarot, the major arcana of the tarot. And I think that's where I got the name the Empress from, because they were all going to be kind of tarot cards. And then it evolved and changed as I was writing this book. But I wanted to include elements of hoodoo or conjure, and that's kind of the foot track dust, the foot powder. Uncle Nazareth is a character in the book who, they're not sure if he's real or if he's a charlatan, but he is sort of a root doctor in DC. And so a lot of it comes from that and from research into that, and just even stories that my grandmother used to tell and things that come from my family, but also things I've read and looked into about, how is this practiced? There's certain either superstitions or elements of that even if someone is not a practitioner of hoodoo, and there still are people who do practice, but things that work its way into your consciousness. Like my grandmother would always be like, oh, if you have a sore throat, put a potato in a sock and tie it around your neck, things like that. And I think it work? I've never actually tried it, but she used to say it all the time. It just sounded so ridiculous to me that I couldn't bring myself to try it. But there's always like a give and a take,
Right.
And looking at Zora Neale Hurston has a book, Hoodoo in America, where she traveled and talked to all different kinds of practitioners and wrote down their formulas, their spells, or whatever they're called. And so taking from that, having a little bit of hoodoo here, and the idea of spirits, taking from like the orishas even, which are present in lots of different forms in anything from Santeria to voodoo to candomblé, all kinds of whenever Africans came over here and, kept some and incorporated, Christianity or Native American religion, all of that went into play in mixing it up and trying to create something that was unique, but had these hallmarks to real culture. And even like the man in black, who is the enigma that Israel is in debt to.
He was so creepy.
Right? He was a shadow, but, that idea that musicians would sell their soul to the devil or meet the devil at the crossroads, that came into play as like, oh, well, what if this was just a spirit and he has this deal so that he can improve his career, but he, there is that cost. There's always that cost. Magic should have a cost. That's kind of a foundational rule in writing fantasy and writing magic systems, and taking from real life belief systems and traditions, and just sort of making it my own a little bit.
Okay. Yeah, and you see, I wore my Zora Neale Hurston shirt.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Just for this episode.
I love Zora.
Oh, I do too. I think I have almost all of her books, and she's amazing. Yes. She really is. She kind of, I feel like Zelda almost embodies her. Just that, that.
Yeah, I can see that. That wasn't in my head, but now that you say that, you're absolutely right. Like
that unapologetic, because
right.
I've read and Zora, Zelda, the Z. It's in your subconscious.
It must have been.
Because, Zora didn't take no stuff from nobody.
Absolutely not. Right.
None. So, yeah, I feel like Zelda, maybe her spirit was even in Clara a little bit. Because, Clara wasn't afraid to get into a dust-up with anybody.
Right?
Yeah.
And that was tough for me because I was always writing Clara to be, a little too soft and be like, oh no, Clara wouldn't do that. You got to take it at like 3 notches. Okay,
right.
Now we're at Clara.
Yeah, especially when she talked about how that one time when she was in jail and she's like, I regretted starting that fight with that one woman. That was not a good move.
Not a good move. Learn my lesson there.
But still, I feel like she would still stand 10 toes down. Like, well, look, she started it. So
exactly, yeah, that's what you got to do. That's her personality. So.
Right,
and I love that about her.
Yeah, I love that about her too. I love that scrappiness. So let's talk about Makeda's ring. Now, you said that all these things you pull in, so this is true as well? Is Makeda's ring, is this like some folklore, or what is going on there?
Makeda's ring actually is not true.
Really?
That is something that I completely invented. I based it on, so one of my inspirations on the playlist that I was listening to when I would think about this is Cassandra Wilson has a song called Solomon Sang. It's off the new Moon Daughter album, which I just adored that album. Okay. And it's sort of a love story between Solomon and Makeda, which, there's one tradition that is like, okay, they were in love. Then there is the Ethiopian version from the Kebra Nagast, which is where we get the story of Solomon drugging Makeda and impregnating her, essentially against her will. And so I was pulling from different traditions because there's different versions of the Queen of Sheba, depending on, if you're looking in the Bible, if you're looking in the Ethiopian, records and histories. So Solomon had a ring that's kind of based in, he was able to control the jinn with the ring. We have that from different places. Okay. There wasn't anything about Makeda having a ring, but or a daughter. Like she gave birth to Menelik, I believe, and there's the lineage is down there. I was like, what if she had a daughter? If looking at the Ethiopian record and saying, okay, if she had been drugged and essentially assaulted in order to become pregnant, she would feel some type of way about that and not want anything like that to happen again. And if it was actually twins and she hid this daughter from history and she created her own ring based on Solomon's ring. So that was where it came from in my mind. But yeah, there wasn't anything actually real about that aside from I wanted the Queen of Sheba to be in this book for some reason. Right.
Well, it was amazing because like you have the whole like most of this story starts to revolve around this ring and its powers, you know, and I just, when I think Queen of Sheba, I didn't even know the Queen of Sheba's name. I just always know Queen of Sheba. So I didn't even know her name was Makeda. I told you, this book was like a whole lesson in history for me. So now the aforementioned ring allowed whoever wore it really to steal people's destinies. And I think there was this larger meaning, which you kind of alluded to a little bit earlier, to destinies and not wasting your destiny.
Right.
Share with us why that message was there. Why was it important?
I was, at one point in this, I was looking at different sorts of African religions, and I can't remember exactly which one, but there is this idea of, a God-given destiny in certain West African religions, and trying to connect everything back. Like, this is our history and ancestry. What could I take from these ideas? And so thinking about slavery and how that essentially stole the destinies of hundreds of thousands of people and really altered them and changed them. And we are still feeling those effects right now. Like Black people are still feeling the effects very viscerally of that damage that was done to us. So yeah, trying to create a story where we can at once have a community and take control of our lives and feel like we have the ability to manage our destinies, while also recognizing that there's been this sort of ancestral psychic damage done throughout history. That's just sort of what I was balancing and trying to talk about in this way, and just in connecting all of these things that just get jumbled in my brain and they come out in this way.
Yeah, because I did like that one part as well where they go searching. Langston's ass was just useless and it was supposed to be organized and stuff. So they had to go and like get Langston to go and find in his file system this paper, and it's written by this gentleman who, had come over on the ship, but not as an enslaved person, but, and he hadn't descended from enslaved people, but he felt a connection and wanted to come here and study and to be amongst all of the descendants of the people who were stolen from Africa. And then he writes about this ring that Dr. Woodson, a little bit disappointed in him for that. He's just like, poppycock, we're not writing about that. And just, it doesn't get published, so I love that you tied that in there.
Yeah. And Dr. Hansberry, the professor at Howard, was a real person.
Really?
Oh, yeah. He was actually, I think, the cousin of Lorraine Hansberry, who wrote
I was
Raisin
going to
in
say,
the
is
Sun.
there a connection?
Yes,
Okay.
and he was an African studies professor at Howard, so I got another little real life person in there to
Nice.
tell us about this. Yeah, the student who came from the Sudan, because there were African students at Howard. And, I found out about that. I was like, oh, okay, goes in the book. And so, yeah.
So you've been just like, as you're studying, you're doing your research, you're like, oh, that's going in the book. That's going in the book.
Right.
That's going in the book.
Anything I can to just build it out and make it more full.
So did you have like a fact sheet that you just kept, like a running tally of things that you wanted to put in the book? How did you keep track of all the things that you wanted to put in?
I did, yes. I use Scrivener to write, and I also use it for a story Bible. And I had this research log of all of these different ideas, different concepts, a whole thing about DC, like every aspect of DC that I could find: prisons, nightlife, government, street lights. When did they turn the street lights from gas to electric? The street cars that they used to have in DC. Where were the routes? I found the map. Anyway, I could go into lots of detail. But every aspect of there's a whole African history one, and when I started going into the Queen of Sheba, Makeda, and different versions of her history, because she has different names in different cultures. It was the Ethiopians who called her Makeda. But yes, so I had all these different files in a Scrivener file, and just organized in different kind of tabs. So I would dump everything in, and a lot of the little bits like that would just stay in my head. Where I was like, okay, I want an East African to be here, just to show this the breadth of the diaspora. Like there's Black people all over, and just a nod to maybe his ancestors weren't taken as slaves, but he still had some sort of solidarity with us and wanted to study at Howard. So yeah.
So after you've done all this months of research, do you make an outline for your book, and then do you make your scenes? What's your writing process?
Yes, definitely outline based. Since this was a heist, I had to really study the format of a heist and try to make sure I'm hitting all of those points. In addition, just to the love story that I wanted to have in there a little bit. There's always going to be a little bit of romance and the main general plot points. So I kind of mushed them all together, created I usually start with just a bullet outline and then expand that into writing each scene as a paragraph so that I know what I'm going to do. And then I can start the first draft. And I do the first draft as fast as I can without any editing. So I try to write it in 4 to 6 weeks if possible, really pushing myself, because I'm telling myself the story with that first draft, and I don't know anything. I usually stay with my outline until about the midpoint, and then the second half is always very different. Because I've discovered things about the characters as I was writing. I was like, oh no, they wouldn't do that. We're doing everything differently. So yeah, then I had a good first draft, which my editor kind of came back and we retooled, and I hadn't hit all the heist points that I thought I had. So a second draft where I was really tightening it up and actually made it a lot longer. Like I had to add 20,000 words from the first time my editor saw it. Yeah. I generally start short. My first drafts are always the shortest, and then they get longer and longer as I build everything out. And I know everything now, so I can describe it better, and I can just go deeper and fill out all of the flesh of the bones.
So was there any point in the book where you just got stuck and you just had to step away, or, just figure out how to get unstuck?
This book, actually, not too bad. There was a point where I wasn't happy with the midpoint. There's a scene in the middle of the book where they infiltrate this warehouse and they kind of discover these missing people. And I played around with that a lot because I wasn't quite happy with what was going on. And actually the Greys, you mentioned the Greys, these spirits, they came around in a later draft. I knew there was something happening with Clara. There was some reason she was afraid to use her power, but I wasn't exactly sure what that was. And so that was one of the things that came about later. Like there's these entities that are spirits, but not quite as sentient, that frightened her as a child. And that was one of those things that came in, and I could tie it in with the end, and it helped me throughout the book, tighten up her backstory and then bring those entities around at the end to help make it make more sense than it had in the first draft.
Now, that's a side question I had with the ring. Once it's in a certain person's possession, I won't say who, y'all got to read the book. Why are the afflicted. Some of them were saved, some of them were beyond, but they weren't. The destinies weren't completely untied to the ring, because that's something she had to figure out. Why did you kind of leave that somewhat unresolved?
Yeah, I wanted the main storyline of the book to be closed and have a little window open. Okay. It was written as a standalone. You know, I knew that this publisher doesn't really do sequels. But I like to have a story live on in the head of the reader a little bit and leave myself room if one day I do want to come back. And I do get emails like every week about people, is there a sequel to Monsters We Defy?
Right.
So, I mean, maybe there's enough goodwill and energy around it that I had ideas and I had other places to go. So I wanted to have it be satisfying, but it's not completely closed off because of where the ring ends up, and they don't know all of the secrets. There's still open questions about it that could fuel another story, or could just be like living in the mind of the reader a little bit.
It is living in my mind, because I'm like, wait a minute, what's going to happen to all those people? What are we going to figure this out? Leslye,
there's only a few people who weren't saved. There's like a small handful, I think, of people who were.
Yeah,
but
but still.
What are you
going to do? And then the poor people who didn't make it, like they tried and just like, nope, they were just gone too long. That broke my heart, that they were just kind of in the comas and just waste. But that warehouse was freaky. You know, the way that they're just
like zombies almost.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a zombie story without the zombies.
Yeah.
But a similar idea.
They're there, but they're not there. They're just the foot. What is it? The foot dust. I called it the wrong thing.
Foot track powder. I think.
Foot track powder. Yeah.
Yeah.
People walking through it, and
And that's how they were getting them. Yeah.
Yeah. So now I know you're working on another book. Please tell us about this book.
Yes, the current work in progress is another historical fantasy. This one takes place in the Deep South, in an all-black town, and it's being threatened by the construction of a dam. And so there's a mysterious stranger comes to town saying that he has a way to save the town. But our main character, Jane, recognizes him, except he died 12 years before.
Wow.
And so that is the story. I had a title. The title is in flux now, so I can't give you what the title will be.
Man, I was just going to ask what the title is.
I know. But yes, anyone interested, please sign up for my newsletter. I will be talking about it. It's supposed to be out, I think, probably April 2024, around that time. So
okay.
I am finishing it up. It's due in a few weeks, and it's coming together really nicely. I'm really, really proud about the story. I'm super excited about it.
I'm excited because that's historical fiction, and like, you know, black towns and all that stuff is just like really, I don't know, that's just the heart of what I like to read. I love those kinds of stories. Yeah. So tell readers where they can find your books.
So you can they should be available everywhere. My website is lpenelope.com, and everything is linked there. I try to have everything in audiobook as well for audio listeners, and hopefully check out some of the books.
Okay, and where can we find you on social media?
I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Leslye Penelope, Leslye with a Y-E, so Leslye. And yes, I'm actually TikTok occasionally on there too, as Leslye Penelope.
Yeah, I have a TikTok too, but I think I have like maybe 10 videos I've done. It's just too much work for me.
There's so much. I need to write first, and everything else if I can squeeze it in.
Right. Well, thank you for sharing your time and talents with us today. I'm so glad to have you back on. Truly, truly enjoyed this book, The Monsters We Defy. Thank you for coming here today.
Thank you. It's always so great to talk to you.
Yeah, you too. And I want you to come back. I want to read this book that's coming out and have you back on the show for that.
Absolutely.
Okay, and Booze and Bros, y'all know how I do. I usually leave you with a quote, but since Langston was mentioned in this book, I'm going to leave you with his poem that I had to learn in 3rd grade in a black private school. And I could probably still say it by heart, but I don't trust myself on camera to do it. And it says, I've known rivers. I've known rivers ancient as the world and older than the flow of human blood in human veins. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. I bathed in the Euphrates when dawns were young. I built my hut near the Congo, and it lulled me to sleep. I looked upon the Nile and raised the pyramids above it. I heard the singing of the Mississippi when Abe Lincoln went down to New Orleans, and I've seen its muddy bosom turn all golden in the sunset. I've known rivers, ancient, dusky rivers. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. Until next time, y'all know what to do. Grab a book and read, and I'm out. Thank you for lending me your ear today. If you've enjoyed this independent podcast, you can help me continue to shine the light on Black authors and their stories by becoming a patron at patreon.com/betweenthereads, or by giving a one-time gift at www.ko-fi.com/betweenthereadspodcast. That's ko-fi.com/betweenthereadspodcast. Tune in next time for another great episode.